surrounding the election.
So it was just so.
That crowd?
He never really couldn't get
Just don't, you know.
What he did was.
All right, Bryce says we're good. So, all right, it is 4 o'clock. So we'll go ahead and get started with the Business and Community Affairs Committee meeting for Thursday, January 2nd, 2025. Our first city meeting of the year. So, Councilmember Peacock is absent and asked if one of us could chair the meeting today, and here I am. So, I'm glad to have all of you here. We have 2 items on the agenda. The first one is a continued discussion regarding creation of a tax increment finance TIF master plan. And it looks like we have our former city attorney here, Catherine Walker, to have this conversation with us.
I just won't go away, sorry. So I thought I'd just start because we missed in December due to my illness. I apologize, but I wanted to kind of review sort of what we've done in the previous 2 meetings. At our meeting in October, we talked very broadly about TIFs, how to create one, what makes one eligible, what kind of project costs can be covered, and then we pulled up the Department of Commerce maps for their enterprise zones and kind of identified some areas for potential TIFs for further consideration. I came back in November and I had combined a couple of the TIFs we had identified because they were adjacent to one another, and then we also looked further at a South Norman TIF. We looked at possible project areas and increment districts to support those, and then talked about what to do next. And the next thing identified was to move forward with Griffin because that was a little more urgent than the South Norman TIF, although there is some developing properties down in the South Norman area that we wanted to consider as well. And so that's what I've been working on. And to do this, I've gone through all of those increment districts I showed you previously and indexed and inventoried each and every parcel. What the land use plan shows it as, what it's actually developed it as whether there's vacant lots or lots with properties or structures that are sort of prime for redevelopment. A lot of it, we just don't know what will happen in the next 25 years. So just trying to pick off maybe the easy ones to use for projections is kind of where I started. And of course, Griffin's the easiest because none of that's on the property tax rolls. So anything that happens there will be new if the state no longer owns the property. So we developed a large project area that would include Griffin Park, Griffin Memorial Hospital property, goes down the Flood Avenue corridor, captures the hospital property and East Downtown and part of the Porter corridor as well. And then I tried to limit the increment districts to just areas of commercial development. I didn't want to include residential. We don't need to siphon off any of that tax growth. We really want to look at things that are going to redevelop in a substantial way in terms of commercial or office type use. So let's see, I've got those maps. This is the project area. It's really large, and the reason I went up and grabbed Griffin Park and Sutton Wilderness is because it might be nice to have some extra funding if you need some to purchase that property at some point in the future. And so I wanted to go ahead and include that. The project area is the area where any of the TIF money can be spent. So wanted to grab a large area. We talked about different things that could be done in each of these corridors, and I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to project costs.
In your map, you have some other little green spots that are on the outside of that project area. Are they relevant to that, or are they just green spots?
Those are from our GIS maps, and those are parks. That denotes park property. Yeah. Increment district number 6, or maybe A. I think in the project plan draft I'm working on, I've got it as A because your increment district 4 and 5 associated with the arena is sort of up in the air right now. So I thought maybe just start with A, so you might see that when you get to the final document. But this is the first increment district. This property runs south of Robinson, west of flood, excludes some of that residential and tries to capture the commercial and industrial property within that area. There are some houses in this area where you'll see they're currently serving a residential use, but they are denoted on the land use plan as industrial. Because we have a housing shortage, I didn't make any assumptions about that being redeveloped. So I left those alone in my projections. You can see here sort of the difference between 2025 and how it's zoned. This is a large part of our industrial property closer to Core Norman. We have a lot along Flood further north, but we have a good little area here as well. There are not a lot of vacant lots in this area. This is not an area where I think we're going to generate a ton of revenue. But we might get some redevelopment over 25 years that could contribute to the project. So wanted to include it as it was in the project area as well. As I said, there's 10 lots that contain houses, but they're identified for industrial uses, didn't use those. These are very conservative. For this piece, as much as any, it really is a best guess. We don't really have anything concrete that we know is developing there or redeveloping there. So I tried to be really conservative, and then when we go through and do our estimates, we even become more conservative and do some reductions there. But we're showing $2 million for potential development investment, maybe 20,000 square feet of retail space along Flood and some of those commercial spots. We've got one shopping center I know that is in disrepair, and maybe that's an area for good commercial development. So looking at things like that and just trying to be fairly conservative.
They took the computer store out, finally,
Yeah,
after all these decades. It's gone. So projects, though, in this specific area would be potentially the Flood streetscape, sidewalks, stuff like that.
right, things like that. We've also talked about incentives for people to improve their commercial exterior. We've got one city in Oklahoma that's doing that right now. They haven't had a lot of takers, but I think that's something that Councilmember Peacock and others were interested
Yeah.
in for some commercial enhancements.
Councilmember Graham?
So is that a facade grant?
Yeah, and it's under the category of assistance in development financing, so
How does that work? Like when we think about TIFs and what they can do for the business community and the surrounding area, if you're an established business in this area and now it's getting redeveloped, maybe somebody's listening and they're like, oh, the city's eyeballing. How do you, I don't know if you call it protect, but like not let the small business get gentrified out?
yeah, I think this is one way you do that, is help support them in other ways. We can do public improvements that help the businesses, street improvements, sidewalk improvements, landscaping, things like that in the public spaces that can be really helpful. But then these facade improvements, I think, are important too, so that they have something to enhance their own business and to fit in with some of the new development that may be happening around them.
What are the mechanisms of being eligible for it? Do we get to decide? Oh, okay.
You would just be adopting a policy for how to implement those dollars. So in Owasso, I think that's the one city we've worked with where they wanted to do this. I think they set a dollar limit, and then they set out sort of what you could use those funds for, what eligible expenses they wanted to cover, and so they adopted all of that inside of a policy and created an application form, and they're ready to go.
And people are interested but just haven't really gone all in for it yet.
It's fairly new, so I just don't know that they've had
An
a
awareness.
lot of applicants yet, but yeah, and it may be an awareness issue, but that's something that can be put together.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And to just the $2 million that would be generated potentially in this specific area. Like if we wanted to redo North Flood from Acres to Robinson, TIF revenue from the entire boundary all the way to 12th could be used for that project.
Yeah, TIF revenue from the 3 increment
It
districts.
doesn't just have to be from
Right.
this little.
Right, and that's the beauty of it, is you can combine all of those and then choose any project within the project area and use those funds to cover that. This is increment district number 7. This is getting to the east side of the railroad tracks, the part of downtown that didn't get included in Center City, up to Robinson, capturing the hospital property, of course, with the hopes that some of that as it develops might go on the property tax rolls. And that's really the big piece of the projections here. You can see some of the differences in zoning, but it's primarily commercial. And then the hospital piece has not been on the tax rolls before, so that's a good spot for some potential increment to be generated. Again, very conservative here because I don't know for sure how much of that property the hospital might sell or how much they might retain ownership of. But we estimated $20 million in potential development investment within that area over 25 years. 30,000 square feet of retail, somewhere in there over 25 years. And I should have said at the beginning, at the end, I'll show you what all those numbers come out to in terms of project cost for the entire project. Increment district number 8 is the big one, Griffin. So this will be all of the state-owned property as it develops and gets sold off. That will start to generate increment revenue for the TIF. That's pretty easy. When you look at the land use plan and the zoning, it's not been platted, it's not been zoned, it's designated institutional. So here, because we don't have a firm plan yet of what might develop here, I use the ULI report because I think it's still pretty relevant. From Maine to Alameda, that report designated that area a wellness campus for community services and things like that. I think that's continuing. We know some of those current tenants of the state of Oklahoma are going to stay in their buildings. We know Norman is looking for a shelter site, things like that. This is an area where all that can be. So I didn't make any assumptions about Maine to Alameda because most of those are probably going to be nonprofits or government agencies. And so they're not going to contribute to the property tax or sales tax. Maine to Robinson, they showed in the ULI report residential mixed use and a commercial mixed use district. So I assumed about 50% of that would be residential and 50% would be commercial. Here, this is again a conservative estimate, but about $80 million over 25 years potentially in development, and then 100,000 square feet of retail estimated. That may be on the low end depending on what ends up getting platted and zoned there, but those are just our best guesses based on this ULI report. So when we look at project costs, I think we have 2 major categories here. We have assistance and development financing. This can be project assistance. This can be small business enhancements, employment generation assistance if we bring in businesses or offices. We have some potential there. And of course, in the project plan, it's written very broadly, and then you'll implement and spend the funds with development agreements or a policy for small facade grants, things like that. Public infrastructure, this is a big piece of it. We know that this area, Griffin in particular, is in need of public infrastructure, but also flood and other areas, East Downtown Porter, there may be some opportunities there. But the big ones are going to be at Griffin. We want to cover potential acquisition of Griffin Park and Sutton Wilderness if the funds that have been reserved for that purpose are not sufficient at the end of the day. Street, water, and sewer improvements, streetscape, landscaping, chapel restoration. I know that's an important one. I did not wear my Keep the Chapel pin, Councilmember Hall, but I know that's been important to some of you all and to the community. Public park, things like that, to be included in public infrastructure.
So Catherine, quick question. We know we can use TIF proceeds for real property acquisition, and could be right away, could be the soccer park, Sutton Wilderness area. And I'm thinking about bond language that says if we know in advance we're going to go tie up a piece of property or buy a piece of property, but we want to repay ourselves through bond proceeds. Could council consider language that would say if Mr. Francisco is able to piece together general fund reserves to buy Sutton Wilderness and or the Griffin Soccer Park, but the goal would be to repay the general fund out of TIF revenue. Is that an allowable?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be issuing, if you did it with a bond, it'd be a revenue bond pledging these specific revenues. And so, yes, you could do that for that particular purpose.
So just something to
And
consider.
we could do a revenue bond based off of TIF funds to do north flood streetscape if we wanted to.
Right.
Instead of putting
Right.
it on the
The-
next bond.
The trick is when we're in a situation where we don't know what's going to develop for sure, we have to be able to back up our revenue estimates with something solid for a bank to be willing to issue bonds on. So that'll be the difficult part, I think, but you could certainly do that. And if you have a big development coming in at Griffin, you'd probably have some of that documentation and support that you need for that.
If we cash flowed it just out of the general fund and didn't go to the bond market, could we repay the general fund out of TIF
Yes,
revenues?
yeah.
So I think Mr. Francisco has been making provisions for the eventual acquisition of Sutton and the soccer park. But it's a, you know, it could be, $6 million. So that just consumes future flexibility the council may have at your disposal. So Mr. Francisco and I will always look for angles to make sure your general fund is as healthy and robust as possible.
So this is the maybe exciting part. I was excited to get to a number, even knowing these are conservative estimates without a lot of data about what's actually going to develop in these areas. So I assumed a 60% split for sales tax. This is just the non-dedicated portion of the sales tax. So this is your general sales tax and your capital fund penny. I know Anthony doesn't like that, I don't think, but it's not your PSST, it's not your Norman Forward, it's not a potential, city transit or the regional transit portions of sales tax. It's just the non-dedicated portion. And this is what was in UNP, where we had a similar split. So that gives the city some benefit immediately of any sales tax generated in the district, any growth in sales tax, while reserving a good portion for public improvements and other things to meet the goals of this TIF. I assumed 100% ad valorem. Of course, that's the biggest piece with Griffin. So I think over 25 years, $61 million, somewhere in that range, is pretty doable. This is just a suggested project cost allocation. Talking with Daryl, I know they've identified quite a bit of public improvements that could be done. We want to reserve some for assistance and development financing, whether it's bringing in a particular development that needs some assistance to hit the bottom line for housing or something like that, or facade grants or other things. And then public improvements, I should say, would include the chapel restoration, public spaces, public parks, things like that as well. Reserve some for implementation and administration, and then some contingency, just in case, you find something really expensive with your public improvements needs to be done. You've got a little bit of extra funding in there. Always good to have that. So around $61 million is what we're thinking for project costs. This will change as we get more details, I think, about what's going to happen with Griffin and things like that. But it's a decent estimate, I think we can work with for now.
So, and I'm thinking about our Porter corridor project. We've got relatively current costs incurred in the beautification and revamp of that Porter corridor. Scott, I don't know if we've got a North Flood Avenue project. It'll be a thing if council decides this is where we'd like to go. We could put together for you kind of an idea in-house. Does it become a 3-lane road so we're not consuming too much right away off the shoulders? What might that look like? And based on cost estimates from current projects, give you an idea about what that North Flood scenario might look like. James Garner was a huge plus to helping keep traffic moving on Flood, but Flood's still busy. It's still snug.
So 3 lanes, but like the middle is a turning lane.
Get in and out of
Would
it,
be
yeah.
really great. And maybe also a project like that might reduce number of turn-ins. drives.
Yep,
that.
ingress opportunities, absolutely.
Maybe.
So if this is where council winds up going, then that would be a project we would put on our list of things to do to bring you back some cost estimates, so you can kind of start allocating. We've never put engineering eyes inside that chapel to get a ballpark estimate, but with this, we've got a lot of marching orders ahead of us.
Well, I had planned for it to probably, I know I was gonna advocate for sure that it be a project on the next bond in 2029. 2019 was a 10-year program, right? So we're already almost there. So, but I had been planning to advocate that the North Flood be a project in that package whenever it comes around, whether I was on council or not at the time. But I think given the federal funding we received for Gray Street and Porter, that North Flood might have similar points being able to get scored to get federal funding for it. So I would definitely like to see, regardless of this discussion, us have a plan ready for that project, either on the next bond package or in this program.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that and say, I kind of see these things as maybe a combination of funding sources. So I don't know what it will take to restore that chapel, but I could see the design or other things coming out of that, but maybe the actual restoration is through a Norman Forward or maybe a grant. Those things can merge pretty seamlessly, right?
Absolutely.
And it's wonderful when you have the opportunity to layer financing sources. I don't know if any steps have been taken in terms of historic preservation related to that chapel. I would think just from a data construction, it probably qualifies. It's old enough to have, that kind of historical significance to it. So, the more sources, the greater likelihood of success.
Okay.
We've got a weekly update. We had a 2-week gap during the holidays with OMES next Wednesday, and the eventual sale of that state property does continue to move forward. Waiting on some appraisals. My guess is they're in the possession of OMES now, and we'll get an update on what they anticipate generating from the sale of that property. As willing participants, they would be a willing applicant to advance the TIF. So,
Great. So when you adopt a project plan, you all will recall you have the zoning and the land use plan designations attached to that. And so that's one piece we kind of need to figure out, I think, is what kind of zoning. We know currently it doesn't have any. So what's that gonna look like and how to move that forward together? So that'll be one piece to do moving forward. I have the start of a skeletal project plan, trying to get my projections worked into that, and I wanna go through them a couple more times to make sure that I haven't messed up any Excel formulas. I don't think I have, but it was a little challenging to look at by the end of the day today. So I can bring that back next month, if that works.
I think so.
On the South Norman TIF, I don't know if you guys want to start moving forward with developing projections for that, kind of putting something together for that.
Councilmember Green.
I know that the Griffin Master Plan, if memory serves, Jane, it's March that we'll see it.
I thought it was February. Oh, I didn't bring my,
Very
Calendar
soon.
with
Okay,
We'll
that's
have the
good.
master plan.
it's February.
Okay.
so
February.
timing wise, that could be great in terms of here is generically what we think the zoning and land use need to look like according to Marty's efforts.
Oh,
So it'll be February 11th is when, well, so it'll be February 11th when Marty's back.
Yeah, so that'll be after Baca.
I mean, we could talk about it in March.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just wanted to put that out there because, and I don't know if that's a recursive process where we're like, oh, we like it, but I don't know. But I assume I trust Marty. I feel like whatever he presents will be pretty great.
He did get great input from all those participating council members, in sharing their vision for what could happen on that real property. And we do recognize whatever we adopt is absolutely subject to change based on the ultimate disposition of the real property. We could meet somebody entirely out of the blue that shows up and says, I have a great idea. Well, it'll require potentially a zone change and a land use plan amendment, which is okay, because we do those on paper, and as long as council's satisfied with the final product before permits are issued, no harm, no foul.
Has one of the discussions about zoning for the area been our traditional zoning or form-based code, or a mix of the two? Or
I haven't heard any discussion about form-based code, but I think, for Griffin, it makes sense to have a PUD if you're gonna do a mix of uses, I would think. And then you guys can help define kind of how that gets developed instead of with the straight zoning where it's just by the code requirements.
and that decision though could affect those
Values.
numbers depending on how
Absolutely.
dense we allow it, or
Right.
could
Yeah, I mean,
generate
I-
more.
Use the ULI plan because that's what we had and it's still a pretty good plan, I think. And just based on discussions I've heard you all have, but certainly the final plan could change that
Okay.
significantly, depending on what's done with it.
And then you were saying about the South
Mm-hmm.
Mormon, so that would, I didn't see any slides about that one in here. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if we're gonna come back and talk about this one in March, maybe in February, we could talk more about South Mormon.
Yeah.
Okay, I can work on projections and my index of property.
Are you hanging around after the meeting? Because we know about some projects that are in that area.
We just approved a big one down there
Yeah.
since the last Baca meeting.
Yeah, I've heard of that one.
Yeah.
I think that's why we wanted to extend that boundary southward
Yeah.
at the last
Yep.
meeting.
And then we had talked too about, I don't recall if it went as far west as Jenkins, because we approved that other large development there.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
3 weeks ago also.
And we do remember the conversations about the cost of the bridge,
Yes.
and
And
which
Jenkins
is
Avenue.
really hard to make pencil out. If you attach it to and make it a requirement of anything to get built, we'll never get the development or the bridge. So a TIF could be a great public infrastructure component to say we want to include this bridge because it benefits everybody who's already down there too. So it'd be
We'll
great.
have to look at the maps to see if the enterprise zone
If
goes
it
that
goes
far
over
west. Yeah,
And then if it's not, then it can't be.
it could be as a redevelopment area under the Local Development Act. You don't have to be in or reinvestment area rather. You don't have to be in an incentive or enterprise zone necessarily. But I can look at those qualifications and see if we can't find a way to make that work.
And then last time we talked about the potential of a TIF that was basically included the mall and went south and included Ed Noble Parkway all the way east to Barry, encompassing all of West Lindsay Street as well. But you mentioned that one might not be,
Yeah, none of that is in an
none of
enterprise
it's in
zone.
an enterprise
Yeah.
zone, so that couldn't qualify.
Yeah, most of our enterprise zones are core Norman East, with the exception of UNP, which was designated as such in the 90s, I think.
I know we had talked about, there's been lots of discussion about the mall and just malls everywhere in the country and them being repurposed or reused, or the parking lots getting developed and stuff like that with housing. And then we approved that pretty large project by Ed Noble Parkway too recently. And then the future of Ed Noble Parkway itself, and then discussions about West Lindsay Street and redevelopment that may happen along it, facade improvement grants, stuff like that. And so I know there've been desire from some folks to look at that, but you're saying that because it's none of that is in an enterprise zone, we wouldn't be able to do a TIF that would include any of that area.
Yeah, we'd have to find a way to justify it as a reinvestment area, and I don't know that we can do all of that, but I can look at that more and bring that back next month.
Okay, and I didn't know if there were any other suggestions anybody had about other TIF areas, but that covered the ones I've been thinking about. Mayor Hickel?
One question that comes on that, Catherine, is it seems to me that Oklahoma City has a wider development area always in what they're doing. Their project TIFs are much smaller. The reason we're not doing that is because most of Norman is housing, and that we don't want housing inside the TIF. Is that?
That's part of it, but we're doing that here by drawing the bigger project area with the 3 increment districts, and that's really what you see in Oklahoma City. They have a huge project area over downtown, and then they have different increment districts that are implemented, usually project by project, for the downtown area. But they focus on those commercial areas where you're gonna be generating more ad valorem and more sales tax.
Which makes sense. Thank you.
And then the Griffin or South Norman TIF, would either one of them include like 12th and Lindsay area? And is that area in an enterprise zone?
I believe that one is, it didn't extend that far south. But I think that was in the South Norman one.
In the south?
Yeah, I'll bring that map back next time, because I think we captured that and then went all the way down to Cedar Lane. And obviously we want to go further to capture other developments.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any other further comment from council about this item? Okay, all right, then I guess we'll continue this discussion at the next couple VACA meetings. Thank you. Okay, item number 2 on the agenda is a discussion regarding expansion of the Central Norman Zoning Overlay District. We have Jane here to lead a presentation for us on this item.
Feel a bird on your shoulder?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh my gosh, I'm take you out there. So sorry. It's, so if I could. What? Sorry, I didn't know what was going on. Okay, thank you so much, Jane Hudson, Planning Director. If I could, may I include a couple people that have been working on this with us? So I have Lee Hall. Lee is on our steering committee for AIM. Patrick Schrank as well. Siobhan Evans is back over there behind you. Of course, Lisa Craig and Laura Hoggett. So I'm really excited about this one. This is to talk about, Lisa, do you want to come up here so you can answer questions about? Sure. So I volunteer her.
You're just afraid I'm gonna kick you again.
Yeah. Right. So many of you are familiar with the Central Norman Zoning Overlay District that was adopted back in 2017, and I've got a couple maps that you'll see here in a few minutes, but the main premise behind doing the Central Norman Zoning Overlay District was, like I said, it was in 2017. And it was in response to a lot of the discussions that we were having for the high density, looking at a lot of the duplexes that were being built. This was before Center City was ever adopted, so we didn't have any of that in place either. But there were a lot of the neighborhoods around this core area that were, the houses were being bought up very quickly and increasing the density from single family, just the traditional 900 square foot home on the lot, and it was going to a duplex with 8 to 10 bedrooms, for the entire development. So staff was directed by council at that time to look at implementing what we have now as the Central Norman Zoning Overlay District. And I just wanted to point out, we have these 8 goals that were in place to protect this area. And again, this was the old silk stocking, and then some areas around the Miller Historic District is what was originally adopted. But as you can read through these, it was very important to stabilize those neighborhoods. And then you can see on number 6, where we were talking about promoting and retaining the affordable housing stock. So in looking at doing some of the discussions for the overlay district, we were looking at if you were going to be building more than 4 bedrooms, council should be getting a look at this and giving a special use for those with 4 or more bedrooms. And then those existing structures, if they were going to increase to 5 or more bedrooms, they would also require a special use approval. So like I said, I love this up here. I can look at this instead of having to turn around. But we've got the map here for the existing boundaries. And you can see it's north of Boyd, south of Robinson, and it's situated between the railroad tracks and Porter. And the boundaries show commercial in there, but the ordinance itself is really for those residentially zoned lots in the old silk stocking neighborhood. And then you can see down at the bottom of the map there, we also included the R3 zone lots that were around the Miller Historic District. So that original area was for the control of the bedrooms, and it would give council a chance to look at it and see what they would be redeveloping in that area. And I will tell you, when we did this, the old silk stocking neighborhood, they actually were contacting us because they were getting flyers in their mailbox weekly about somebody wanting to buy their property. And so they were actually working with us and looking at ways to protect their neighborhood. So we've got a couple things that we want to talk about. Some of it is just some housekeeping and some updates for the applicability. And then also we're going to be looking at expanding the boundaries to include some new neighborhoods. And these are really straightforward. In some of consistency in the zoning code, in some of the ordinances in the zoning code, we say the SINZOD, and that's what I've always called it, but we say SINZOD apostrophe and then we spell it out. And then if you look at the Center City Form-Based Code, we simply say Center City Form-Based Code, but we all refer to it as CCFBC too. So we were just looking at trying to clean some of it up and just be consistent. So that's really all this is on those first two. The last one is within the overlay district, we have a statement under special use and it says all residential units. That should say all new residential units. And so we wanted to amend that as well. And then under the applicability, number 3 there really is duplicative. And so we just thought just to simplify it and clean it up, we would take out the 3rd one because that's already covered in the first one. It says any new construction. And so 3 just simply repeats that. So it's really just clean up. Another one we wanted to talk about was when we did the Center City Form-Based Code, we added this definition that you can see here on the screen. And as you see, the top definition is what is in the overlay district, and we would really like for them to match. We had a definition in the Center City Form-Based Code, came back 2 years ago, I believe, and added this additional information. We had some issues with people creating dens, and then they would turn them into bedrooms, and so we ended up with more bedrooms than what were actually permitted and everything. So we had this definition for the Center City Form-Based Code, and we thought if we could just have some consistency across the board there, that we would amend that as well.
And council, that thought of den converted to a bedroom, as we recognize every bedroom means a car. And if we were figuring we'd get 6 cars and they converted, now there's a 7th car parking in the street or in the neighbor's yard, it made a mess. So the opportunity for us to understand how many bedrooms, how many cars, and that's actually what we get at the other end was really important.
Councilman Nash.
Was is there a reason that we went with 4 bedrooms and not 5?
4 bedrooms is what I think what we were seeing that went in a lot of the duplexes, 4 or 5 bedrooms. And so in the actual overlay district right now, if it is a new structure, it's 4 bedrooms, special use. But if you have an existing structure, and you're just doing interior remodels, you can have the 5 without having to do the special use, but it's for the new structures that are being built. I don't think that there was ever a discussion between 4 and 5. I think 4 was just like the number people were initially wanting to get in there.
Because 4 is a pretty common number for bedrooms, especially, and as a parent with 3 kids, that, you know, I'd be looking for a home with 4 bedrooms or building one. 5 does start to kind of get into that area where that's, you know, that is kind of a extraordinary amount of bedrooms, and just seems like having that cut off at 4 instead of 5 just seems like it kind of adds an inappropriate burden to people just wanting to build their single family home.
Yeah. You know, now that you say that, I do remember there was some discussion about that exactly. But because of what we were getting as far as the student housing product, I think still that's why they settled on the 4 bedrooms.
I don't know, is that up for discussion?
No.
No?
This is the core, and parking and infrastructure are problems.
Okay.
So if you have an answer for those 2 things,
Yeah, don't get too many cars, but still have kids.
Doesn't say no, it just says there's an extra step.
That's a pretty big step though. Okay.
And so the discussions, okay, so expanding the district to include new neighborhoods. That, again, like I said, that is one of the reasons why we're really here. And I just put a couple of the bullets in there. You know, we're really looking at character preservation for some of our central neighborhoods, our core neighborhoods, the discussions that have been going on in AIM Norman. And then, of course, we still have our pending zoning code and subdivision regulation updates. So it's just like that domino starting to go, and it's just we're trying to make sure we keep up with everything as it moves forward. So this is the proposed district extent. You can see the blue on this map. That is the existing Central Norman zoning overlay district. I will add to this, not to get too deep in it, but since 2017, 18, since 2018, staff has been working on what at one time we had a title, a name for the project, and we were looking at, even years ago, expanding the overlay district to include First Courthouse and original town site. COVID happened, and then many other things happened, and we never got there. We had neighborhood meetings. We had a couple public meetings about expanding, and so that would be the area to the east of the existing overlay district. But, and again, like I said, with the AIM discussions that have been going on, we thought this is a perfect time to go ahead and bring all of this forward. And again, I want to make sure that Lee Hall and Patrick, because I said, they're on the steering committee, they've been part of the working group, the land use working group that we've been having different meetings, additional meetings, working on AIM. And Patrick's been a lifesaver. I mean, he's really dug in and done a lot of this work on this for us and getting some of these areas identified as to where we wanted to continue this overlay to protect some of these existing neighborhoods with a lot of our affordable housing stock. So, I mean, if there's something that you guys want to add to it, I really do want you guys to speak up and give us some additional input.
Well, I would just like to say that we have been working on, it's been a council goal to expand the Cinzad boundary area since it was first implemented. In my experience, it's one of the policies that we've developed that has absolutely addressed trying to encourage what we want to see in Core Norman, which is increasing density, but in small incremental ways outside of the Center City Form-Based Code area. So it's been effective, it's been proven, and I think the timing is really good because now we have so many different things coming together with the work on the land use plan, the discussion about affordable housing that I think everybody is really tuned into right now. And the challenge in our core areas has always been, how do we increase density in sustainable ways and still protect our affordable housing stock? And this has been a big area of discussion in the last year in the AIM Steering Committee work. And so the land use group that got together the last couple months or so also identified special study areas, and they're all over Norman, but in particular, this extended boundary area really does cover the special study areas that we want to provide that extra layer of thought and oversight from our elected officials to make sure that we're trying to accomplish two goals at the same time, which is to increase density in the core and also protect affordable housing stock. That is a challenge. Yeah. So this is a policy that has been proven effective that we really do think will help. It's really encouraging for me particularly because I've worked on this for a long time to see how we can use this to allow the oversight that we need to do as a city until we get all of the other pieces of the puzzle that we need to get the kind of development that we want to see. So land use is the first step, obviously, but I think you all are aware that the planning department has a grant out to overhaul the 1954 zoning code. So this is actually a piece of the puzzle that comes in the middle to help guide how we are going to look in the future until we can get all of the pieces put together for a comprehensive approach. So really, really excited about how this can help us achieve those goals.
You know, in the thought just of every affordable unit council preserves through policy is an affordable unit you don't have to subsidize with taxpayer dollars somewhere else. And these units are as affordable as any single family residential unit in Norman, you know, because they're not 4,000 square foot homes. The cost of development back in the day was substantially lower. So these are houses that are achievable single family owner occupied opportunities. And boy, if you can hang on to that with policy language versus, you know, having to go out and hustle to develop or subsidize the cost of housing elsewhere, this is a great strategy.
Did you want to add anything?
No, I think the only thing I was just gonna mention is, these areas were identified in the comprehensive plan to be a higher density than they're currently. And so this is, I think, you know, that stopgap of how do we kind of figure this out as a, you know, with neighbors, developers, how can we all come together and kind of figure out how to make this work?
Yeah, I agree. And so speaking of the Center City Form-Based Code, I wanted to also have this map that showed the blue areas there is the Center City Form-Based Code, and then the expanded district, you know, definitely abuts up to that form-based code, but it does not overlap with the Center City Form-Based Code. And then, excuse me. And then the final map I have is just again to have the comparison maps, the existing area on the obviously on the left, but then we still have it overlaid on the proposed expansion there on the right side. And yeah, I would love your support on this, and we could move this forward.
What's the north-south street that's right here?
Pickard, Flood.
Pickard.
Flood, it looks like.
Flood.
Yeah. Or no, that's
I think that's
Pickard.
Pickard.
No, that's Pickard. Pickard.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Grant?
Yeah, I'm hugely supportive and I like that the special areas were included. As former councilmember Hall stated, this really does seem like things are aligning to get this done.
The couple questions, the other areas that were not included, so that have been maybe talked about before. Faculty Heights neighborhood, so all the way to 12th there on the bottom right corner. The Hardy Rucker neighborhood by the Duck Pond in Madison. And then Councilmember Schuler, when she was still here, I know she had expressed interest in it covering maybe all the way to McGee. I guess there was one specific new house that was built in Ward 2 on Wiley and one of the streets over there, Wiley and something. And Wiley and Cadell cattle. And concern about that happening in that neighborhood, as it may be more, I don't know, difficult is not necessarily the word, but to build in the core area. So, or like, we saw some of this where we put center city policy in, and then one of those developers started building what they were building before, just south of Boyd Street on Trout Street and Page, and now on Jenkins. And so just that, are a couple of the other areas that have these older stock of houses that are smaller and cheaper, for sure. So I wasn't sure if those have been discussed in recent discussions, or if so, why are they not included?
They have been discussed, and I think, I'm gonna turn around, I'm gonna look at Patrick and Lee. Did we designate those as high?
I believe Faculty Heights is in the special study area.
Special study
for
area.
12th and Lindsay.
So that one's been, so Faculty Heights has been included in a special study area already.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, Hardy Rucker is high, but only on the north side, so only kind of that portion that's closer to Lindsay. And then over where you're talking about, Wiley and Cadell is in low, I believe.
Yeah.
So those areas aren't that big or drastic change in the comprehensive plan. Let me look at.
Those are areas that seem like they could become places where people might be interested in redeveloping
They could, they genuinely could, and
into bigger houses than are what they're now.
yeah, and that's one of the things that's been when we had one of our first meetings, I mean, it really does concern me that those could be areas that could be turned over, and we've seen how fast they can turn over.
Well,
So it's definitely something that we can look at expanding, but I will say too, I'm concerned expanding it too much, because at some point we do have to have that opportunity for the increased density. It has to go somewhere. But
it
if
can still go in this area, right? It
In
just has
terms
to
of
go,
ADUs,
ADUs, yes, but
and just if they wanna build, if they wanna tear down the house and build an apartment building,
And
they
I
could, they
think
just have
part
to
of
get
the
rezoned.
Have to get
conversation that we
rezoned,
had
right.
was, a lot of these areas are designated for increased density, and all this is regulating is the number of bedrooms in a unit. The increased density can still occur, it's just we will be getting the housing product we want.
yeah, bringing it to you to have you take a look at it.
Well, yeah,
I was also gonna just add, we really took a look at the proposed new land uses. And, one of the bigger changes was to elevate almost everything in Core Norman from low urban to medium urban. And so that's, one of the factors that we absolutely recognize how important it is to increase density in the core. But like Lisa just said, doing that in small incremental ways while still allowing the medium urban designation you know, we think accomplishes that, but that we need this piece of the puzzle in place before you move forward. So I believe the barrier, can you look at that? I think there was the Berry Road that the part you're talking about of Councilmember Schuler, that's low urban, so we didn't feel it was as vulnerable.
Just that one at Wiley and Cadell, I think it's just a single family house, so it is bigger than the one that was there before, but it has an increased density because there's still just a family
Just
living
increased
there,
on a
so
lot, yeah.
I think that's some of the concern is that this is it's like twice as big as the house that was there, but it didn't increase the density, and it maybe doesn't go with the look of the neighborhood, I'm not sure, but and same thing in Hardy Rucker. You're right, mainly on the north side along Lindsay and some on the west along Jenkins. There's been a few redevelopments, but really not very many. There's actually just been a bunch of remodels. And then in the very back part by the park, there's been nothing at all. So no activity that I can tell. There's actually a few for sale that aren't selling, so.
Jane, on a separate map, but maybe a map that kind of looks like that, could we designate each one of the neighborhoods with a different color code? Because I learn something new every day. I'd never heard of the Hardy Rutger neighborhood or the Faculty Heights. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I don't know what I don't know. And maybe if I can get a color coded, because I've heard of silk stockings, we talk about that a lot, but I don't know how many more there may be that I've never heard of.
Oh, there's a lot. There's a
Well,
lot.
a lot of these neighborhoods really don't have neighborhood names.
Yeah.
Hardy Rucker's the Platte, and so,
That's
you know,
just
some
what
of
it's
them are
called.
Platte names, some of them are just a connotation that the neighbors have come up with over years.
Yep.
So,
Fascinating.
Yeah. But yeah, those are pretty much all the neighborhoods I was thinking about that not necessarily at risk, but is the word, but fit in with the same idea, I think, so.
I'm happy to go back and look at them again. I mean, we definitely can and really drill down further just to make sure we're not missing something.
Maybe, yeah, that'd be fine. I'm good with this too. I just, just been thinking about that, and then I was thinking about Councilmember Schuler and some of the things she was thinking about before she left. And, Faculty Heights kind of being historic, but it's not historic like 100 years old, but it's I guess where a lot of faculty did live at one time.
they still do.
Yeah.
And several
75
still
years
do.
old,
I used to live in that neighborhood too, so. Okay. And there was, I guess, a concern about, it had come up before about, did we want the city council having to vote on any time somebody came forward with one of these? And I can't really think of very many of them in the last 8 years that have come to us. And
Not many at all.
I remember one that we said no to, but it was kind of a weird deal. Like they brought the family and the kids and were saying they needed a fourth bedroom. Never saw them again.
We can have more under this. It's that.
And if that would create some sort of, not a backlog or burden, but do we want the council to have to vote on every time somebody comes forward with something? But I haven't really seen it be an issue. And I don't recall if is it part of that same discussion about letting the Board of Adjustment approve them and not all going to city council? Okay.
And, like you said, we haven't seen many. And honestly, I would rather have this start getting more applications to see, what's gonna be built. And maybe we need to tweak it. Maybe it is something that needs to change. Maybe it's 4 to 5 bedrooms instead of, we change it from 4 to 5. Maybe that would help make that change. I don't know, but we can always step back a little bit, but it's gonna be harder for us to jump forward if we see those changes and we lose some of the character in these neighborhoods.
I agree. Councilmember Grant?
Yeah, I'm happy to move forward with this. Also, is there an expiration on it? Like, once we get into zoning updates, will we still need a SINZOD?
I'm gonna say yes, but
Okay.
that's also going to depend on what we end up with our zoning code. So we
Okay.
need to see how that's gonna play out too.
Well, I'm happy to have this. If you wanna look at the other two that Stephen talked about, sure, but also I think it seems like it's not, you guys don't get a lot of them coming through, so, yeah, I'm happy with this.
Well, like I said, we'll drill down and at least, I'll at least have an answer for you. So when we bring it forward, if there are any questions, we can make sure that we've answered those questions.
Okay. Any final comment, questions from council? Okay, seeing none. All right. Anything final from staff? That's it? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much. If there is no further comments or anything from the committee, then this meeting is adjourned.
Right here.
No. What is playing